In today's video, we have all kinds of NHL news and rumors to take a look at, including some trade talk around the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Colorado Avalanche, and we have what I consider to be a fairly significant update on the future of Sidney Crosby. Could he leave the Penguins? We talked about this a few days ago. We're going to expand on that based on some new information I've come across. Plus, Jeremy Swayman is now fully eligible for an offer sheet in Boston. Both the player and the team have not elected salary arbitration, kind of keeping things open, so to speak. Plus, several of the top prospects from the 2024 NHL draft, including the top couple picks, have all signed their ELCs today. All that and more coming up next. Well, welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to talk about here today. Let's start first with some of the big news around the top prospects signing some contracts today. Some of the top prospects of the 2024 NHL draft were not a given or a slam dunk to go straight to the NHL. There is, for some people at least, a belief that going back to play college hockey was still a possibility, if not even a fairly good option. But for some of these players, they've signed, which now eliminates that from being a possibility. The San Jose Sharks today signed first overall pick Macklin Celebrini. He gets his 3-year entry-level contract. Of course, he gets all the max Schedule A and B bonuses that he can possibly get in there, being the top pick in the draft. So Celebrini could have returned to college, has opted obviously not to do that. So Celebrini is going to be playing in the NHL for the Sharks next year. Of course, they signed Will Smith, who came out of college as well. So we're going to get our first glimpse at these two young studs playing in the Sharks lineup. It's going to be a very interesting time to see how strong they can be in their rookie seasons, but obviously, I don't know if we should set expectations too crazy high, but at least the Sharks, they're going to have more than one guy in a fairly high-profile prospect role, kind of starting this year together. Whereas like last year, Chicago had Connor Bedard, and he didn't have the greatest supporting cast. Not that the San Jose Sharks have an amazing supporting cast, but they certainly have started working on bringing some guys in, and of course they have some other rookies, so it'd be interesting to see how everything plays out. The number 2 pick in the draft, who did go to Chicago, Arnold Levshunov, the big right shot defenseman who came from Michigan State University, is also turning pro. Now, there was a lot of belief he very well was more likely than Celebrini to go back for his sophomore season, and that's not happening. But of course, it's also possible that Levshunov could play in the American Hockey League as well. Not a given that the Blackhawks will have him on the everyday NHL roster. I would suspect at some point next season he makes his debut and gets games in, but depending on what Chicago wants to do here, they want to do what's best for the player. They're not really in any need to rush him. If they feel like he's ready after going through all the rookie camp, training camp, etc., and if maybe he starts the year in the NHL and goes down after. It's hard to say how this plays out with him, but certainly they have options. They'll take them. Another year of development wouldn't be the worst thing at all for the number 2 pick. But Levshunov will be turning pro and playing at one of those 2 levels and will not be returning to college. That much we do know for certain. A couple more picks as well from the first round, including Jet Lushenko, the Philadelphia Flyers' 13th overall pick from the OHL's Guelph Storm, has also signed his 3-year entry-level contract. Of course, he's a CHL player, so completely different scenario there for them than it is with the NCAA kids, but obviously Lushenko will definitely be returning to the Ontario Hockey League and going with his draft plus 1 season in Guelph, next year. I suspect Lushenko will have a good opportunity as well to get on the radar for Hockey Canada and maybe be able to play in the World Juniors and have a big campaign. I know a lot of the top prospects from the CHL have been drafted. Will certainly be looking to elevate things and take things up a notch here now that they've got their draft selection underway and get some ELCs sorted out. A couple of ELCs signed today as well with the Washington Capitals. They signed Ilya Protas, who's the third rounder, number 75 overall. Of course, his brother, Alexei Protas, plays with the Capitals already. He's a big boy as well. He gets his 3-year ELC. Protas had already played in the USHL last year, playing in the US. So to me, I think he could turn out to be possibly a third-round steal. I do think that his upside is certainly higher than what he was drafted by, but time will tell. Things can be difficult to project at this stage. The Capitals also signed right shot defenseman Cam Allen, who was a 2023 draft selection taken in the 5th round. Also, a teammate of Jet Lushenko is from the OHL's Guelph Storm, so he gets his 3-year entry-level contract as well. A couple other signings as well in Winnipeg. Now, neither of these are ELCs, but a couple of RFAs, and Logan Stanley and David Gustafsson both signed 2-year deals. Logan Stanley gets 2 years at $1.25 million as his AAV, and David Gustafsson's 2-year contract gives him an average annual value of $835,000. Gustafsson can play both center and wing, whereas Stanley, of course, is a defenseman. I'm not really sure that giving either of these guys 2 years is, the greatest idea. In Gustafsson's case, being $835 is definitely easier to manipulate. You can always put the player on waivers. They can go to the minors. It's fully variable. It's not a big deal. Stanley, if for some reason they had to put him on waivers or something, it's not like they can't really bury most of that contract too if it came down to it. But for a player in Stanley, who's barely played the past 2 years, to get a 2-year deal at that kind of money is a little bit surprising. I mean, I know that this is a player that they've been high on for a while, but, considering he's 26 now, I don't really know that he's developing or a prospect. I don't know. I think a 1-year deal for even less than that would have been justifiable. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, either way, they're not contracts that are, like I said, an overly big deal. If things are not working out for either player, it's not like they'll have a big impact on the cap situation. They can both be put on waivers if necessary, and most of the Stanley contract and all of the Gustafsson contract can be buried if it boils down to that. So we'll see how things go, obviously, on that front. Now, when it comes to salary arbitration, we talked yesterday that 14 players had elected salary arbitration to get their contracts settled with their NHL clubs. And yesterday was a deadline, which is why that was all fully announced. Well, today was team-elected salary arbitration, and we didn't see any news in that front. So that's certainly notable that teams have not elected to take a particular player to salary arbitration. And the most notable name that we thought maybe there was a chance was Bruins goaltender Jeremy Swayman. Now, of course, Swayman himself had the opportunity, chose not to. I know, when, like I said, he had to deal with this before and swore he was never going through arbitration again. It's an interesting move, though, because sometimes players or teams will file for arbitration with the hope that they won't make it there, because once you file for arbitration, you can still negotiate up until the hearing. But one thing that a lot of people may not realize is when you file for arbitration, you're no longer eligible for an offer sheet. And I'm not entirely convinced that Jeremy Swayman is going to be a major target, or is like a really good likelihood that it's going to happen. But in theory, it could. And if Swayman gets to a point that he's frustrated with the Bruins and another team comes knocking on the door with an offer sheet, something he likes, it could happen. Now, of course, the Bruins would have first right to match. I suspect they would do everything in their power to do so, because clearly they already traded Allmark. They don't want to lose Swayman too. That would set them back big time. And they go from having one of the greatest, if not the greatest tandem in hockey, to losing them both and really not getting any immediate goaltending help outside of Jonas Korpisalo to be compensation. They'd be in a hurting spot. So I don't suspect that's really going to be all that likely. If you go through the teams around the NHL, that'd even be possible. For one, I don't think you're really going to stand a chance to even get Swayman's attention to sign an offer sheet unless you're offering minimum $8 million, probably more like 9-10, because I think it's rumored that he's looking for something around 8 from the Bruins. Maybe they settle on something closer to 7. I don't know. But that's kind of that 7-8 range is probably what he's looking for. I think an 8 times 8 would be something that he would be quite happy with from what I've heard. But we'll see. Of course, we don't know 100%. That's just a speculation that we're hearing from different NHL reporters and insiders. But to get his attention to even consider leaving, you're going to have to offer him a fair bit more than that. So if you look around the teams that have the space, like I was looking around, theoretically, Carolina has the space. Their goaltending has been a little bit influx, but they also have contracts that are due for Natchez and Jarvis. So really they have the space, but they really don't in a sense. So they would end up having to make some other trades. They could delay getting those players signed, deal with this, and then, but it would just be chaotic. Doable, yes. Complicated, very much so. So because of that, I think it's unlikely. But because it's Carolina and they've done it before, it kind of makes you wonder, would they do it again? Calgary's an interesting team to look at, but they also don't have a first-round pick coming up. They do. They have a couple first-rounders, but they don't have their own first-rounder. And when it comes to compensation for offer sheets, it's all based on picks. And you have to have your own picks for that to work. So, I mean, again, Calgary's a team that would probably love to grab a goaltender like him. If you mention a Swayman-Wolf combo, that would be great. But at the same time, I don't really think they can realistically make it work anyways. And again, is he going to sign it? Are they going to want a $10 million offer sheet on a goalie? It just doesn't make sense for Calgary, who's rebuilding. So you look around, a team like even LA theoretically had some space, but they just got Darcy Kuemper. They have some other contracts to look after. So like the teams that have the space have other things that they need to do with a decent amount of that space. And just, not a lot of teams out there that have a ton of room. Even looking at the Blackhawks have under $5 million in space now. So again, I don't know that a Swayman offer sheet is overly likely, but the fact that neither the team or the player have elected for that contract negotiation to go to arbitration, it leaves it open for it. But we'll see. I have my doubts that it's going to happen. If we do see an offer sheet this summer, I would suspect it's going to be a lower type of number, a player that's not really nearly as prominent. Like, the Oilers are kind of in tough right now. Somebody wanted to hurt them by going after like Broberg or Holloway, a player like that. Maybe even if you offer them, say, I don't know, even $4 or $5 million, the compensation's not ridiculous, and the Oilers would have a tough time to match. It would force them to make some moves. So, there's obviously other players like that might be more susceptible to it, but Swayman's the big name that's out there that everybody's looking at. So, unlikely, but theoretically possible. Now, on to some other rumors around the NHL. I did come across one article today suggesting that the Avalanche are still considering making upgrades to their roster. Of course, like I said, because of the situation with their captain, Gabriel Landeskog, and Val Nichushkin, they do very much have some handcuffs on for what they're able to do. We've talked about that in other videos, that they need to be careful because they obviously, if Landeskog can play, they want him to play, so they need to have space to activate him. He's been on, theoretically he's not on LTIR right now. That has to be redone every season, but if they get to training camp and he can't play and he goes to make the comeback and it just doesn't work out, well, then he can go on LTIR for the rest of the season, and then they can say, okay, now we can try to make a move. But they need to allow him the chance to play first before that can happen. Nishushkin's a different situation because he's suspended because of the violations that he went through with the drug testing. So obviously when he is eligible to come back, at this point, the belief is that the Avalanche are going to want to support him, allow him to come back, and slowly integrate him back to be a part of the team. Now, it's going to probably be until like November sometime. It's when it sounds like that's going to happen. But again, they have to have the space to make that happen because while he's suspended, his cap hit is not really hurting him. But, they're going to have that space available for him to be coming back and be activated to play. So they're kind of in a situation where they can't do a lot. It's going to have to be like, not all be money in, money out. They have a little bit of room right now. They could do something more less significant. They just can't replace those guys. But the article I was referencing here believes that they still want to make an upgrade in goal. They're still not completely sold on Georgiev being the main guy. Of course, we saw him get off to a shaky start in the playoffs this past season against the Winnipeg Jets, but then really settled in and took over that series along with the skaters in front of them, and they eliminated them in 5 games. But of course, the Avalanche went on to win that series, but then lose in the subsequent round. So obviously, do the Avalanche have goaltending that are comparable to like Dallas or Vancouver or any of these other teams that have really solid goalies, or even Winnipeg. Like, no, they don't. That's the problem. And some of these other top teams in the West, they do have an edge on the Avalanche, I think. Now, the same thing could be said for Edmonton, though, and look what Edmonton did this past year. So it's not all about goaltending, but Skinner was good enough to get them to where they were, and he did play his role, even though he had some shaky games early in the playoffs. Once he settled in, he was more than fine, and I'm sure that's going to build his confidence over time as well. But the name that came up for the Avalanche that they could be targeting is Buffalo Sabres goalie Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Now, we still wonder about his long-term future in Buffalo, given that Devin Levi is there. We know the Sabres are super high on him. They brought in James Reimer, so it kind of made you wonder, is Reimer really going to be happy to be a number 3? Are they going to go with UPL and Levi, with Reimer only kind of mixing in occasionally? We don't know how this is going to work for that 3-team or 3-goalie tandem situation in Buffalo. Are they going to end up in a situation where Levi is going to be in the minors? I don't know. I mean, it's a big year for Buffalo. When you're looking at the Sabres and the teams like Ottawa, they did not make the steps last year to get into the playoffs. So this is going to be even more important this year. And the longer this goes, the more pressure there is, the more jobs are going to be lost if it doesn't work out. They need to make that step forward this year. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was their most consistent goalie last year. So I understand, and right now he's one of the players that are waiting on a new contract and salary arbitration. Maybe they settle it on their own and come to a multi-year deal. Maybe they don't. Maybe he ends up on a 1-year contract. That's certainly possible as well. And then you're going to have to wonder, especially if it reaches arbitration, is this going to be impacting the relationship? How long do they want to run with this before they kind of give the keys to Levi? A lot of questions there. So the Avalanche are kind of, I think, monitoring that situation and would consider an upgrade if they could. Now, I don't know if they would try to offer Georgiev as the, offer in return for UPL if they do have those conversations, or if they would try to bring in, because theoretically, depending on what UPL gets for a contract, they might be able to make it work to bring him in and have a tandem of the two of them, which I think would benefit them, but it would be trickier to do. It would kind of make things tough to do some other things with the roster. So we'll see. I'm certainly on the team in belief that the Avalanche are not completely against making a move and upgrade goaltending if they can. It's just going to be challenging, but this was one of the goalies around the NHL for me that makes total sense for them. He's still young enough that he could be there a long time. His price on the contract's not going to be astronomical. The Sabres are in a situation where they have him, but they have Levi, and you don't know how long they're going to want to run both of them here. So it could be a prime situation to watch. So we'll see. When it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, a couple of comments, one from Nick Kypreos, one from Chris Johnson, both connected NHL people here would believe that the Leafs are certainly not done making moves to their roster. I know Kypreos was talking about the fact that neither one of them kind of focused on the fact of we're going to see a blockbuster deal. It's more like, trimming around the edges, so to speak, that it's more like a bottom 6 and, defense potential moves that we could see. And Kypreos was talking about, he feels that they need to address the bottom 6 here. Obviously, they haven't really done a whole heck of a lot to the top 6. I mean, they brought back Domi, Bertuzzi, leaves via free agency. There really hasn't been a whole lot of change in the Leafs roster. But he believes a player like David Kampf is a player that very likely going to go. I mean, that's a contract that I don't think is going to, from the day it was signed, it was like, you don't give a player who's realistically a 4C that doesn't give you much offense that kind of term. I mean, $2.4 million over, was it 4 or 5 years? Like, that's crazy. Players of that nature don't get that kind of term. And ideally, you don't want somebody on your fourth line making that kind of money. I think he was signed to that contract with the expectation he'd be more on the third line, and at times he has been. But realistically, I think your team is a lot better if he's on your fourth. So again, it's not that they completely dislike the player, but the term and the money don't really match what he gives you. And don't be surprised if the Leafs do try to move David Kampf to free up some extra space here and make some other moves within that bottom 6 of the lineup. Chris Johnson also talking about the fact that even though we signed a contract, especially looking at what else they've done through free agency, don't be surprised if Timothy Liljegren is also moved. I mean, look at what else they've done here on the blue line. We know Riley's not going anywhere, so they bring in Tanev to be the top pair right side partner. They bring in Oliver Ekman-Larsson. You've got Jake McCabe. Obviously, there's other defensemen here that they brought in, like the Hockenpah. Hopefully he can play. So clearly some of these guys are probably going to have... Now, the only thing is they don't have a lot of right shot guys. So I guess moving Liljegren from that sense is like, okay, well, do you want to move one of the few right shots you do have and have more left shots? Unless they can bring back a cheaper right shot D. I'm not sure if that's going to be an option. Depends on where he goes, of course, and what the return could be. But there was a lot of talk about Liljegren as soon as the season ended, that the Leafs are very likely to move him. They wanted to reshape their blue line. And, well, here we are. They have done a lot of reshaping, and he's still here on a 2-year contract, which he, even during his media availability after signing it, made mention that he was hoping it would get done. He likes Toronto, wanted to stay and all that. But again, he doesn't have the trade protection in his contract right now, and it's not an outrageous deal. There's lots of teams looking for capable, serviceable right shot D who can play either second or third pair. I don't think they'd have a problem moving them, to be honest. So we'll see what they do. But as much as we may or may not see a blockbuster move out of the Leafs, I think for the most part, the core guys, it's looking like they're going to all be back at this point. That we could see some... more of the depth and the supporting players, if you will, maybe get moved to kind of shake things up a bit, which is typical in Toronto. You see that to some degree every year for the last number of years since, because of their cap situation and the top guys making so much money, the depth around them typically has to change a lot from year to year to keep things moving along. And lastly, I want to update on Sidney Crosby. A few days ago, we talked about, the possibility of Crosby. And could he actually leave Pittsburgh? What's his future hold? Is he going to sign a contract extension this year? Obviously he entered a really long-term deal at $8.7 million per season, average annual value with the Penguins many, many moons ago. We're finally at the end of that. It's past July 1st now, so he's for the first time in, forever, 12 years or whatever it is, 11 years, that he's eligible to sign a contract extension. Well, of course, the Penguins are not really in the greatest situation. They've missed the playoffs the past couple of years. This time last year, it was all about Malkin and Letang. Of course, longtime teammates of Crosby's, good buddies. They played together the entire time. And obviously, he really advocated for his friends to be able to get contract extensions and to keep the band together and to keep running it back to try to win together again. Well, of course, they had another season. Things did not go well. They brought in Erik Karlsson. Had obviously Kyle Dubas' first year at the helm here. And it really didn't go well. And at this stage, considering what we've seen out of the Penguins front office this summer for any other changes, it's really not all that radically different of a team. We've seen lots of teams in that division, most notably the Devils, and you could probably argue the Capitals make moves to get better. To some degree, you expect the Islanders to be at least about the same, so to speak. I mean, Islanders haven't changed a whole lot. They brought in Anthony Duclair. There is not a ton of change there, a little bit. Obviously, like I said, New Jersey gotten a lot better. Columbus, you expect to probably still most likely be at the bottom of the division. Carolina is different. They may not be as strong, but they're still going to be a good team. The Rangers are still pretty good. It's just hard to imagine, with the roster the way it is, that the Penguins can move up in the division and be more likely to be a playoff team. It really is. So again, like when we talked about it before, the expectation was that Crosby wasn't in a hurry, but just a lot of speculation over where things were going to be. Last time we looked at comments from NHL reporters. I think it was Nick Kiprios, if I'm not mistaken, said that a lot of eyebrows were raised around the league when on July 1, the Penguins and Crosby did not announce an extension. Well, now I guess there was an interview done back right around the time of free agency, and which I didn't see until today, where his agent Pat Brisson had made some comments, which kind of will raise some eyebrows even further, and it kind of makes you wonder, is there really a chance for change here? Is it really possible that maybe Crosby doesn't sign an extension? And is there a possibility maybe he does play out his final season with the Penguins? I don't think that we're going to see a Crosby trade this summer. I mean, that would be shocking. I don't really see nobody out there is saying that's possible or likely or anything of this nature. But it does bring a lot of attention to the fact that he wants to win. And that's the part that's troubling here. Now, the agent, Pat Brisson, basically said that Crosby's a very loyal guy, but it has to make sense for him when it comes to talking about his, contract extension and everything. Ideally, I think it's fair to say, and this is not Brisson's comments, but ideally, I don't think anybody would doubt that if Crosby had his wish and had his way, he would remain a Penguin. He'd be competing for Stanley Cups right up till the day he decides to hang him up. Unfortunately, the team's not in that kind of predicament. So Brisson goes on to say that obviously he would like to have the chance to win again, but the Pens may not have what it takes to win another Stanley Cup, and they have to think about those things. So at this point, this was as of a few days ago, that there was no discussion on the contract extensions at that point, but it was expected that at some point in July they'd be having those conversations. And, I guess if he buys into what Dubas is selling on the plan to make the team better, and if he believes that he's going to be able to compete for a cup again during this contract, then I would think that he probably stays. The belief is as well is that Crosby is not going to want to sign for the same or less money than he was making before. Even though he's getting up there in years, he's still playing at an extremely high level, and it's definitely fair to say that for a large part of that contract, if not all of it, that he outplayed his contract and was an underpaid player on a very team-friendly contract. So at the very least, a lot of reporters and insiders have kind of projected that he's probably looking at a 3-year extension with around at least $10 million. And honestly, I think that could be easily justifiable. Based on what we saw this past year, there's no doubt he's still playing some of his best hockey. So we'll see. I mean, Dubas, and when he was asked by the Athletics' Josh Yohe about the contract negotiations, extension, etc., he basically said that he was not going to comment on it, that all negotiations were going to be kept private between himself, Sid, and his agent, and that was all he was going to say on it, but that he was going to continue trying to make the team younger and hungrier and trying to get this team towards contending again by doing the plan that he's set out here, which, like we said, is getting more youth, more speed, more skill, but certainly not. That typically does not accelerate things in a hurry. Obviously, over time, they need to build youth into this lineup, but unless you get exceptional youth, like somebody like comes along like Crosby did when he first entered the NHL, it's not usually going to be enough to really move the needle in 1 or 2 seasons to make the team go from being mediocre to being a contender. The article from Josh Yohe in The Athletic also goes on to say that he doesn't expect the Pens to play hardball at all, that he expects Crosby will get whatever he wants if he's willing to sign, and that it's going to be a lot more than the $8.7 million he's been making. Like I mentioned before, I suspect it's going to be at least 10 in probably 3, maybe 4 years. That would be my prediction for a contract, which is numbers that we've heard, and it seemed reasonable and makes sense to a lot of other NHL reporters as well. So at the end of the day, comments from his agent, Pat Brisson, I don't think it certainly sounds off an alarm saying, oh boy, Crosby, maybe he will leave. But at this rate, it does need to make sense for him, and it does kind of affirm the belief, like I talked about in the other video, which I didn't even know these comments at the time, that said I honestly wondered if it was a real possibility that he could move on, because he seems to be like the most ultra-competitive person you've ever met. And it's just hard to imagine Sidney Crosby playing out the final 2, 3, 4 years or whatever it is of his NHL career on a mediocre team, maybe not even making the playoffs, and just kind of riding things out just to have his legacy cemented as being only ever played for one franchise. I don't know what's most important to him, but I just think that he would struggle with that concept. And if he gets frustrated to the point that not thinking that the Penguins are going to be competitive enough to do that and accomplish his goals, it does have to make sense for him. And maybe at that point we do see a real possibility of him maybe teaming up with his buddy Nate McKinnon going to Colorado or something like that. So food for thought. Let's just say that maybe Crosby decides, you know what, I want to see how this year plays out before I sign an extension. Nobody is going to push him. They're not going to pressure him. They're not going to try anything funky. If Crosby says, I want to wait, I don't want to sign right now, I want to get a better feel for the direction of the team, and I want to see how the season goes before I sign anything further, they're going to totally respect that, and they're going to let that fly. And if we get to an end of the year near the trade deadline, and let's just say that they're out of it by a good margin, and it's a similar scenario that Kyle Dubas decided to trade Jake Gensel, could Crosby go to Dubas and say, you know what, you can probably get a good return for me. I obviously will accept a trade to these teams. I don't know, like I said, I'm not sure if it would be his preference to go play with McKinnon. A lot of people think that just because of their good relationship and friendship, but nobody can say that for certain. He's the only one that would know, and maybe he doesn't even know yet either. But, could we see it if he doesn't sign? To me, I totally understand the fact and possibility that he could wait. And if he waits, I do think that it's going to increase the odds that he goes. But at the same time, nobody's going to be shocked if he buys into the idea of the plan and where the Penguins are going and does decide to end up staying. Because you know what? Even with his contract, even if he does sign 3 years at $10 million or whatever, if another year into this he decides, you know what, we're not competing and I need to compete, that's more important to me, he can go to them and say, trade me. And any team would still be happy to try to take on that contract and figure it out. There's no doubt. He's a tradable player no matter what he's making. So I don't think him signing completely eliminates that from being possible. So it could get him the best of both worlds. Allows him to sign with Pittsburgh, get a good contract, evaluate as he goes, and kind of go from there. But we'll see. Obviously, if Pittsburgh trades him versus letting him walk as a UFA would be ultimately quite drastically different. So let me know what you think on the future of Sidney Crosby. Is there any reason for concern if you're a Penguins fan? Is it, these comments from his agent kind of make things more intriguing that maybe he does leave? Or do you think at the end of the day he's going to stay? Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.